my understanding of spiritual direction. I would begin from that point. You're coming alongside a group of people to help them notice and to name where God is present in their life. So I'm Tom Schwanda. I was born and raised in the East. I was a minister for 18 years in the Reformed Church. So married, I have 2 children and 5 grandchildren. And then the last 25 or so years, I've been a professor. And probably one of the most important things to know is that one of my passions is helping Protestants, and in particular evangelicals, to recover a contemplative life. They probably don't know that they need it, but we desperately need it to be healthy and sane. And so a lot of my teaching and a lot of my writing really picks up on what is contemplation, what does it look like, and how can we begin to practice that in our own life. So I was 24 when I was ordained, and I think about that. That church was really very trusting. Here's a 24-year-old person coming out of seminary. So after about 4 years, I felt just a heaviness. I was reading my Bible, I was journaling, I was doing all those things, but I felt that there was something missing. So I went to see my Roman Catholic priest friend. I went down and I say, "Hey, Ray, you've been formed in the life of prayer. What can you teach me to help me? I'm just kind of wrestling." And he said to me, "My suggestion is for you to discover your own tradition." Well, so the reason I started to read Calvin more seriously and then the Puritans was because my Roman Catholic priest friend suggested it. I think God probably finds it very amusing. And I started pushing into the Puritans. And the Puritans, they tend to be so misunderstood. I find that very few people know the Puritans, or even for that matter, Calvin, and they criticize them and they've never read them. So I started to actually read their text and to explore it. And it's like a whole new treasure just opening up to me. And the more I read these, and especially the Puritans, because they write everything about the spiritual life. You can't find any question today that they haven't addressed at least in 10 or more books. They tend to be a bit wordy, and that might be one reason why some people don't read them. But if you spend the time, they are incredibly helpful. So the more I was reading these, I said, how do I try to bridge that gap? And one of the things that I then did was I began moving into the next century. So now I'm into the 18th century, and people would say, well, evangelicals don't contemplate. That's Catholic. And I said, you're wrong. And so I started to wrestle with, and I looked at 4 people, 2 women, 2 men, 2 Wesleyans, 2 Calvinists. And so there was the whole spread at that point, men and women, people that were, wrestling with these questions, and every single one of them reflects a deep contemplative awareness of enjoying God, of delighting in God, and just this sense of hungering and thirsting for God. They would have called it a physician of the soul. Spiritual direction was not even used by the Roman Catholics at that point, really. They were just starting to use the word spirituality in the 17th century. So Protestants would talk about piety. They would talk about godliness. They would talk about growing in grace. There's once in a while they use the word spirituality, but not very commonly. But they were very intentional on guiding people, both through preaching, individual sessions, and increasingly, as we get to the 18th century, people like John Newton, letters. That was the key means. Someone would write them a question and say, I can't read the Bible, or God is absent, or whenever I try to pray, this happens. And so you'll find these letters. John Newton was actually called the Francis of de Sales for evangelicals. So that shows you the way he was recognized. That's a pretty big comparison. And in some cases, with Newton in particular, you can see 8, 10, 12 letters ongoing with an individual to help them gain a deeper sense of what and how. And again, John Newton had a strong contemplative desire and spirituality in his own soul. So if spiritual direction is going to scare them, I might say I'm a spiritual guide. So I've learned to translate the language so they at least can understand, and then give some historical examples to say, there's no reason to be afraid. We always have to discern. So I'm old enough that there weren't spiritual direction programs back when I was first interested. I did a few seminars. My first spiritual director shared the training that she used with her sisters. And then I was part San Francisco Seminary, which is Presbyterian Seminary. They started a 3-year program in spiritual direction. I was part of the original group. I was one of the faculty with that. And then they did a East Coast version of that at Gettysburg Lutheran Seminary in Pennsylvania, and I was one of the co-deans of that. So I had 6 years in training other people. And it was interesting, the first time we were meeting out in San Francisco, Beth Liebert, who's written some wonderful books on discernment and Ignatian spirituality, small groups, Psalms, she said, now, how many of you, and she was talking to the staff, how many of you were trained? None. Not one, because we learned the hard way. So this goes back to the 70s now, when I was first interested in this. I was able to develop more of an eclectic pattern, so I'm not a true Ignatian. I've gone through the 19th annotated day of the spiritual exercises, so I have a deep appreciation for Ignatius and for his whole approach. But I would say it's all the different pieces. Orthodox spiritual direction. Maybe I should say that I have had 5 spiritual directors over my life, and every single one has been a Roman Catholic. I've had a Benedictine abbot, and now currently a Benedictine monk, and then there was a Sister of the Precious Blood, a Dominican here in Grand Rapids, and then a Malachite priest. I begin with a very, very simple process, and I've used this in most of my classes, where I ask them, what helps you to notice God? What hinders you from noticing God? Or to make a variation of that, what helps you to pay attention to the Spirit? What hinders you? It's so simple, and in some ways it's even a variation of, Ignatius' examination of consciousness. Something very practical that people can take with them. I like to give them building blocks so that they won't be confused.
More to cataphatic or apophatic spirituality?
I have a strong preference for cataphatic. I'm a strong intuitive. I have a very vivid imagination, and that is by far my strongest